Afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Dr. Gatu. You think we're ready to go ahead and get a roll call, or do we need to give folks a few more minutes?
Good. All right. Justice Piper Griffin. Bridget DeNicola.
Present.
Senator Rick Ward. Tracy Woods. Representative Duplessis.
Present.
James Lemoyne. Richard Pittman.
Here.
Gina Womack.
Here.
Representative Marcus Bryant.
Present.
All right, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Dr. Nagatu. I just want to begin by saying thank you to everyone for being here today. This is going to be our, I think it's quarterly meeting of the Juvenile Justice Reform Act Implementation Commission. For those of you all who may not be aware, we recently reactivated this commission after many years of it being dormant. And there's obviously no shortage of issues for us to cover. We have a pretty hefty agenda this afternoon, still feels like morning, but this afternoon, we're gonna jump right into it. As I suspect many people who are on the call right now know about the recent situation involving the evacuation of juvenile detainees out of Orleans Parish during Hurricane Ida. And we're going to have some discussion regarding what took place, but more importantly, we're going to have some discussion about how we go forward in terms of identifying solutions for when evacuations need to occur. So there are several people who have been asked to participate this afternoon from different agencies, state and local, who we've asked to come and just share their thoughts and their agency's view on what took place and how we can potentially correct what took place in the during the most recent incident. So we have, I just kind of go over everybody before we begin. I believe we have Secretary LeBlanc from Department of Corrections, Secretary Walters from DCFS. I believe, but I'm not sure if he's on at this time, Dr. Keyshawn Webster from the Orleans Juvenile Justice Center. We also have Demetrius Jobert, who is with the Law Enforcement Commission, and also Undersecretary Bill Summers from OJJ. We're going to give each agency roughly 5 minutes to present themselves and speak on this issue, and then we'll have an opportunity for some Q&A afterwards. So we'd like to start with Secretary LeBlanc. Secretary LeBlanc, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Representative.
Thank you so much for
Can you hear me?
joining us. We had an opportunity to speak several weeks ago, and I'm just going to give you the opportunity just to speak on behalf of DOC, specifically as it relates to juvenile pretrial detainee evacuations during situations like we had most recently.
Okay, I appreciate it. And again, thanks for the opportunity to give y'all our rundown of what transpired during that time. At the request of JJRAIC to provide support housing juveniles in emergency situation in 2018, the department signed a local level emergency evacuation and housing partnership agreement with the City of New Orleans Department of Human Services, JJRAIC, on June 13, 2018, which outlines specific regarding the number of persons to be evacuated, an estimated number, the staffing support to be provided, records transfer, personnel records, medication records, and personal property. This is an agreement that may be exercised during a state of emergency or when an evacuation order is called by the parish authorities, such as a hurricane, which we were dealing with, and was created as a prep measure to be activated if needed. On August 27th, 21, during declared state of emergency, the Juvenile Justice Intervention Center requested assistance to evacuate its 36 juvenile pretrial offenders due to imminent projected Cat 4 hurricane characterized by experts as a life-altering storm. On that same day, the Department of Public Safety and Corrections safely evacuated JJRAIC's pretrial offenders to Elaine Hunt Correctional Center. And I might mention here that our understanding was they had no other option at this point. I'm sure in 2018, and I guess again and when this happened on August the 27th. Pursuant to this request for aid to ensure the safety and well-being of the juveniles housed at JJRAIC in Orleans, we provided a safe and secure shelter for these individuals from August 27th to September 1st, which was 6 days. JJRAIC's 36 juveniles in custody and 26 staff members were housed temporarily at Hunt Correctional Center in HSU2, what we call HSU2, a building separate from adult offenders at the prison. At no time were the juveniles and adult offenders or adult correctional staff ever commingled. And JJRAIC's 26 staff members were supervised the 36 juvenile offenders as delineated in the agreement. The housing location specified in the agreement was a specific empty unit at Dixon Correctional Institute. However, due to COVID-19 global pandemic, the DCI housing unit was occupied and unavailable as currently used as a reverse isolation unit for dialysis patients at Dixon. Furthermore, the unit at Elaine Hunt Correctional Center, HSU2, is a more appropriate placement and was not vacant at the time the original partnership document was created, as it is distinctly separate from the adult housing location. JJRAIC's juveniles were provided the same meals that Elaine Hunt Correctional Center prison was fed. The food was delivered to the door of HSU2, and the JJRAIC staff fed the juveniles. The DPS&C's top priority was to assist in the evacuation of individuals out of the path of a very dangerous storm. JJRAIC's system involved youth and staff were housed temporarily at Elaine Hunt facility, kept distinctly separate from buildings which housed adult inmates at the prison. DPS&C returned the juvenile evacuees to JJRAIC in New Orleans on September 1st, 2021. And I would mention there were two minor incidents that we were aware of. One on August the 30th, two juveniles intentionally damaged two sprinkler heads, causing some water damage to two TVs. We had maintenance staff on site at the time because of the hurricane setup. We kept maintenance staff on the prison property. They were able to respond, and within 30 minutes, we went in and repaired the sprinkler heads, actually blocked the sprinkler heads, and they had to provide fire watch during that time until the sprinklers were brought back online. And then the second incident on the return, two juveniles got in a fight right when they were getting back on the vans to go home. They were separated by JJRAIC staff. Both juveniles then were sent to our medical and released without injury. They were placed in separate vehicles for transport back to New Orleans. And Representative, that's kind of our side of it. You know, the operational part of it during those 6 days was handled by JJRAIC, and I'm not sure exactly where they are with that. Anything in the middle of that, we weren't involved in. So I can't give you a day-by-day blow of what exactly happened during those days, but I know that facility, I know that building, I know it was adequate and a good place to be versus in New Orleans in the middle of that storm and you know, in a safe place. So that was the main thing for us, is to keep those kids safe and in a secure environment.
Thank you, Secretary LeBlanc. I appreciate you sharing those comments with us. I have one question, and then I'll let any other members of the commission ask any questions that they may have. Well, actually, I'll hold my questions and ask first, are there any members of the commission who have any questions for Secretary LeBlanc?
I have a quick question. You said that there was originally a different facility y'all contracted with before the pandemic, but that facility was being used as something else, and so y'all had to use this facility at Hunt. Is that correct?
That is correct. The HSU2 facility was not available when we did the 2018 agreement. It wasn't empty at that time. If it had been empty, we would have used that facility initially, because it's separate and distinct. The facility at DCI was, it was distinct and separate, but they still had adult offenders that, just weren't that far away. So this was a better situation than the original agreement, actually.
So the DCI one, were the adult offenders closer as a result of this change of just using it as a hospital, or
Derek.
have they always been closer?
Hey, Derek, this is T. For right now, we're having the commission members ask questions, but we have time reserved towards the end for public comments and questions. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Nagatu. I should have made that announcement. I do apologize.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna do that towards the end of the meeting. We're gonna allow the commission members, if you have any questions, to ask Secretary LeBlanc. I just had one follow-up, Mr. Secretary, and there are some articles in the Children's Code that, and I realize that there's some pending litigation, but there are some articles in the Children's Code that expressly state that no child subject to the jurisdiction of juvenile court shall be held in an adult jail or lockup. So just kind of walk us through your agency's understanding of how y'all are addressing that, and how y'all, feel like this was the adequate move. But also, this isn't the first time that Louisiana has dealt with hurricanes or evacuations. Just a little bit of the history there in terms of why at this time this type of move seemed adequate.
Well, I would defer a little bit to JJRAIC on that regard. But when we were approached, we have no place to go. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know that statute isn't more about permanently assigning someone to a adult facility versus an emergency like this was. So. From our standpoint, we felt like if we hadn't done that, and that Cat 4 storm would have hit directly in New Orleans, and we hadn't responded, and those kids were left in that facility, and something happened, then I would be asked, why didn't you help them when they were asking for help? So it's kind of in between.
And I also want to make it clear for the record. I want to just state this for the record that I don't think anybody here today would have been okay with those children not being evacuated. Those children needed to be evacuated. So we certainly acknowledge that. I just want to state that and make it clear. We know that we had to get those children out of harm's way. In terms of, as we go forward, do you have any thoughts? Does your agency have any thoughts in terms of how we can adequately address this collectively from an interagency agreements with the local facilities or with OJJ or DCFS? Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share at this time?
My thought is that, and I think Bill Summers has some ideas that I'm not sure that he's shared with the governor yet, that he would like to run by the governor first, but he has some ideas that we could dedicate a facility with beds that could house those kids in an emergency situation. We definitely don't want, we're out of it, and unless somebody tells me I have to do it. But I think OJJ, Marquita, however, I think y'all can come up with a plan that would make sense to have a dedicated space. And that's what we do with the adults. We have an emergency plan, dedicated beds. And sometimes we have to house them on floors in gyms or whatever the case might be if that's necessary, depending on where the storm hits and how many people we have to evacuate. But we have a priority list of beds available in an emergency situation and where they go. And that same thing needs to happen on the juvenile end. And I think they're working on that. I think if Bill here today, I think he is, he may be able to elaborate a little bit on that, what his thoughts are.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I do appreciate your time. I don't have any other questions. If any other members of the commission don't have any questions, we will move on to DCFS. Thank you, Secretary LeBlanc.
You're welcome, Representative, anytime.
All right, take care. We have Secretary Marquita Walters from DCFS. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. Absolutely. I appreciate being here. So I agree with what Secretary LeBlanc said. The safety of the children and youth are always the primary concern. You know, DCFS has responsibility for sheltering our citizenry during storms, but our role in this particular situation is one of licensing. And somewhere around 2010, I think it was, the licensing came to DCFS of the juvenile detention centers. And so the licensing includes evacuation plans. I want to hold that thought because I do have something to say about licensing, but I'll go on with the first part. So as I appreciate it, because I wasn't here in 2010, but as I appreciate it, the recommendations by the Task Force on Juvenile Detention Standards and Licensing was a big group of people with advocates and public defenders and DAs, judges, pediatricians. Maybe many of you on the call were a part of this. Those regs were crafted by that task force, and they made the recommendations that was promulgated into rules, and then we were given that oversight of licensing. So we can provide you with any. I have one of my licensing experts on the call. Joy McCall is with us if people have questions. But as the license said, there were no issues with the license. I mean, they were to evacuate to a safe place, and that's what they did. The current regulations do not prohibit, and federal law also allows for the co-location. Now, you know, there needs to be sight and sound separation, which there was. This building that they went to, Owen Hunt Correctional, was not with adults. They were separate. They were in their own place with their own staff the entire time. So they didn't have any licensing, they didn't break any licensing rules or regs. The providers are required to have a written policy, and they have to have emergency evacuation plans. And I will give it over to Joy if there's anything that I'm missing or misstating, Joy, in this. But other than that, that is the only role that DCFS has, is in that licensing. So I'll come back to what I said I want to put a pin in. I don't think that DCFS is the right place for these licensing standards. I really believe that we could look at legislation, and I know that's on your agenda, Representative, to think about moving this licensing to OJJ, because we are not juvenile experts. We are child welfare experts, and we license our child welfare facilities. And I think that's an appropriate role for us. I don't, like I said, I wasn't here in 2010. I don't know why it was moved to DCFS, but I think it would be more appropriate to be somewhere else. And so later in your agenda, when you want to talk about that, I think that is a recommendation that I would have, that we would give this to the experts.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I know I was going to try to hold questions until the end, but I did have one quick question in regards to understand if anyone visited Hunt and know how the separation looks like. And I think I understood that there were 2 young people that were sent to the infirmary. So what's the clarification on being able to know whether or not there was sight and sound separation at that time?
Is that question, Gina, to Secretary Walters?
Secretary Walters or LeBlanc, whoever can answer.
Because what I would like us to do is just to keep things orderly. If there's a question, as we go through the different speakers and presenters, I would like us to keep the questions to the person that's presenting for purposes of just kind of keeping things orderly. But if you have a question for Secretary Walters, if she can answer it, then please do. And I see Secretary LeBlanc still on the call.
I can answer the part on the two that went to the infirmary. Those were the two I mentioned at the end, where they were getting ready to get on the vans and got into a fight on their way out. And, I say a fight, got into an argument, fight, whatever. So they went to the infirmary and were checked out, but it was no injuries. And they separated them and put them in different vans to return them to New Orleans. Yeah, I mean, that had nothing to do with adult offenders at all, period.
As far as from DCFS licensing, we were provided a map.
Can you just announce your?
This is Joy Lego with DCFS licensing.
Okay, got it. All right.
We were provided a map from DOC. We also did speak with JJRAIC, who also advised us that they were not in the same proximity. They were separate. Everything was separate. And so to our knowledge, they were not together. As well as DOC confirming that for us.
Anything else, Ms. Womack, at this time? Okay. All right. Secretary Walters, do you have anything additional you'd like to share with the commission?
No, sir, not right now.
Okay. We will be revisiting the point regarding the potential of the licensure, what agency, who should be in charge of that, and the discussion around that. So we will be definitely revisiting that. Okay, thank you so much. Now in order, have is Dr. Webster with us from JJRAIC? I do know that he has been under the weather.
Yes, I am here.
All right, sir, I want to start off by saying I hope you're feeling better. And, I do understand you've been under the weather, and appreciate you coming on and joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. Is my microphone, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. The floor is yours.
Is my camera on? Can you see me?
No, sir. But we can hear you. But your camera's not on.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Okay.
Now we can see you, and we can hear you.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you all for inviting us to this conversation. As we all already know that this topic is being litigated, so there are some things that I'm not able to speak on with regards to, predicting the future or speculating on what the outcome is going to be. But we are open to any and all suggestions and opportunities to look at alternatives. We heard some of the feedback. We're aware of the feedback, and this administration has always tried to be responsive. However, given the resources available to us and recognizing that we're the second largest facility in the state of Louisiana, that there are limited options available to this facility. This plan was inherited by this administration. And while when we came in office, we did look at the plan and we made some outreach to neighboring parishes, that did not yield any success with commitments to house our youth. We have some thoughts about why that is so, but on average of the other 11 facilities, they pretty much are licensed between 11 to 30 beds. So there's no facility that is currently licensed by DCSF that could accommodate our entire population of youth and the staff that evacuate with youth, which could add an additional 70 people to a location. All right, so we just wanted to state that up front, that we do have those constraints. In the past, under the leadership of then Deputy Secretary Dr. James Bush, my office reached out to Dr. Bush somewhere between 2019 and early 2020 before his departure and inquired about the prospect of using an OJJ facility. After several days or maybe a couple of weeks of his own exploration into that feasibility, Dr. Bush came back to me and Superintendent Deshelle Williams, who was on a call, and reported to us that OJJ could not accommodate a request from JJRAIC to use its facilities because there was a law that stated we could not mix pre-adjudicated youth with post-adjudicated youth. So, you know, I say that just to let this committee know that there's been some earnest efforts made in the past, and coming short of not having a place to bring our young people for safety is a real conundrum in terms of, you know, any temporary inconveniences that we all experience that takes us out of our comfort zones in times of emergency. But what we recognize by this incident that we really need to look at clarifying the law and making some exceptions in the case of emergencies. It's our understanding on an annual basis, we submit our plans to the regulators for review and acceptance. And we have never received any protests from our regulators saying that our plan was inadequate or it did not comply with licensing standards. So again, we stand by the fact that it was the most appropriate resource available to us at the time, short of not evacuate young people, which we are always concerned about the safety, security, and well-being of our young people. And that's what motivates my team to come to work every day. So with that being said, we are open to any help and assistance that the state can lend us in ways that you know, bodies from a regulatory standpoint could use its power to help really untangle the communication in regards to, you know, how we govern ourselves in these exceptional times when there is an emergency.
Thank you, Dr. Webster. When you say Orleans is the largest, how many, and do you know what the second to large, where do we compare? Do we have, like you said, 87? What's the number in Orleans?
In Orleans, we have 76 beds.
76.
And Florida Parishes is number one with 133 beds.
So they have 133 beds in the Florida parishes. So we're second to largest. Do you know where that puts us in terms of just like average proportionality of other agencies, local agencies throughout the state?
All other agencies have anywhere between 11 to 30 beds.
Okay.
And that was confirmed by an information request from DCSF. So they provided me with that information. So I'm speaking from what's been provided by DCSF.
Okay, because I'm just asking these questions just to kind of better understand what some of these hurdles are that Orleans is running into in trying to get that support, be it through shared agreements. We actually did request that the other juvenile detention facilities throughout the state send in their evacuation plans. We got about 10 out of 12 so far, and starting to look at them, starting to break those down and see how other facilities throughout the state are taking steps to deal with this. There are partnerships that I was able to see, at least in some of them. Like I know that I think Caddo and Calcasieu have an arrangement where, you know, they have a partnership, and it concerns me, certainly being from New Orleans, but just being in this state and on this commission and being concerned about our young people, that we don't have something like that in place similarly, where we know that when this happens, this is another juvenile facility, right? I know that there was the agreement for Hunt, that's what's already been talked about, but that's the part that I'm personally still trying to wrap my mind around, and I think many members of the commission are as well. Maybe it has to do with size, maybe it has to do with some other factors that aren't as quantifiable that may have something to do with other pieces that we need to better understand. But, we need to hear from the city and really understand, what you all perceive these hurdles to be, and why why that other deal had to be made to begin with, right? Why we couldn't get this with another juvenile facility. So those are just some questions, some personal questions that I've been grappling with as we go through this. But I do appreciate you taking the time to come on and speak with us. Do any other members of the commission have questions for Dr. Webster? Mr. Pittman.
Thank you, Representative Duplessis. I wanted to ask, where did he go? Dr. Webster. You have 76 bed capacity. What is the most kids you've had there at any one time since you've been there?
A little over 48. We've had up to like 52 kids or 54 kids. And that's one time that precipitated the need for us to also call neighboring parishes to say, hey, can you do a courtesy hold for us? Because we recognize in our community, we prefer not to transfer our youth to the adult jail, which is Sheriff Marlon Gussman, but we would be turned down with every request. They would find reasons not to accept our kids, even when it was only a request for them to temporarily house one kid.
So is the most you've had 48, 52, or 54?
The most we've had, I would say, go on record and say maybe 54.
Okay. And what's the average number of kids that you have?
On average, 40.
On average, 40? Okay. Do you have the staffing for 76 kids?
Staffing is always an issue for us, but we are able to maintain our state regulated minimum ratios of 1:8.
Based on what occupancy?
Based on 40.
Based on 40. So when you say you have 76 beds, you're not really talking about realistically ever having to move 76 kids.
Not currently at this time.
Okay. And when you reached out to, you said to neighboring parishes?
Yes.
Did you reach out further beyond like St. Tammany and Jefferson and close by places to further away places?
Well, just knowing the capacity limitations of some, we did not reach out to all of them, but we did reach out to neighboring parishes, and particularly Florida parishes. The request was made in writing, and then there was a decision to table a request. The commission at the time did not want to consider it.
Excuse me, Dr. Webster, this is Ms. Williams from JJRAIC. We also reached out to Green Oaks and Monroe.
Okay, when did those outreaches happen?
Between 2018 and 2020. No requests in 2021.
All right. Did you consider maybe reaching agreements with multiple jurisdictions to take some of your population and bring them to different places?
That would complicate the evacuation because we're already limited with staff. And quite frankly, some staff under the pressure of evacuation will quit on the spot because they don't want to evacuate, although it's a part of the job. So we need a place that could maintain the staff and the youth, because we have to have a day shift and a night shift, assuming that the team is working 24 hours.
So that's an avenue that you thought about, but did not approach anyone about, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I think that's all I have, Representative Duplessis.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pittman. Does anybody else have any questions for Dr. Webster and JJRAIC? All right. Thank you, Dr. Webster. We do appreciate you being here with us today. I would ask Demetrius Jobert, if you're on, please.
Good afternoon.
Your name and the agency that you're with.
Hello, my name is Demetrius Jobert, and I am with the Louisiana Commission on Law Enforcement. I am the Juvenile Compliance Monitor. I monitor the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. And I guess in this instance, it deals with 4 core requirements. So that would be jail removal. A juvenile can be held in an adult facility for up to 6 hours on an initial arrest before they have to be released or transferred to a juvenile detention center. And sight and sound separation in an adult facility or in a secure area must be kept at all times. So I'm required to go around the state of Louisiana and visit any facility that can hold a juvenile securely, be that a detention center, a juvenile correctional center, a police department, sheriff's office, and court holding. Normally, we don't do adult correctional centers because any juvenile that enters is usually tried as an adult, which does not fall under the purview of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. I'm required to visit 100% of all secure facilities over a 3-year span. And we basically count violations. So anytime a juvenile is held longer than 6 hours, anytime a juvenile comes in contact with an adult inmate or a trustee, those violations have to be counted. We report to the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. If we go over a certain amount of violations, we lose funding, 20% for each core requirement that we're out of compliance. So saying in this instance, you had a certain amount of juveniles enter adult facility for, I think the document said 6 days. So you're looking at 36 violations per day, every day for jail removal because they were there longer than 6 hours, and separation if they came in contact with adults. I can't, that's nothing that we verified. That'd be something I'd have to go and check into. In an instance where there's an emergency like a hurricane, like they're saying, due diligence was done where they contacted other detention centers to see if they would be available to bring their juveniles there. So if they made that attempt and the only place they could take them was Elaine Hunt, we could ask that the Office of Juvenile Justice basically give us a pass because it was an emergency. They didn't have another place to bring the juveniles, so they would not count those violations against us. However, if they did come in contact with adult inmates, then not only do we have 36 jail removal violations per day for 6 days, then we have 36 separation violations for all those days as well. They did mention that, it was I guess they were co-located where they weren't in the same area. And if that is the case, then we can argue the point that, okay, they didn't come in contact with the adults, so it might not be held against us. However, if those violations count, and we're looking at losing out on 40% of our juvenile budget, and we use that money to fund delinquency prevention programs throughout the state of Louisiana.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Womack?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm wondering if you have any intentions on speaking to the young people who were evacuated?
Normally, we do not talk with juveniles that are in detention. Normally, this is just something that is done with staff. I will be talking to the staff at Elaine Hunt, and I will be talking to the staff with the Youth Study Center, just to see where the juveniles were held and how were they separated from the adult inmates.
And also visiting the infirmary?
Visiting the infirmary would be okay as long as there are no adults present in the area. They have to
right. And I was asking if you were going to visit and tour when you go to visit Hunt, tour the infirmary.
Yes, I will tour any place where the juveniles had visited at that time, so the staff can show me how they were separated and how they were kept separate that whole time.
That's the only question you have, Ms. Womack? All right. Do any members of the commission have any follow-up questions for Mr. Jobert? Thank you for being with us here today, sir. We appreciate you sharing that on behalf of your agency. And next, we're going to ask Mr. Bill Summers with the Office of Juvenile Justice to speak with us.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Afternoon, Mr. Chairman, everybody on the committee. Bill Summers, Deputy Secretary here at OJJ. Just to give a little background, my roots run in the local juvenile justice system. After almost 34 years in Calcasieu, I came to OJJ, been here for over a year. When I was in Calcasieu, I had reciprocal agreements with Jefferson Parish Juvenile Services, Lafayette Juvenile Detention, and Caddo Juvenile Services. In the event we had to evacuate our center, we used that agreement, I believe no less than 4 times, since Hurricane Rita in 2005. And I was there and pulled the trigger on the evacuation right before I came here for Hurricane Laura in 2020. They used that same agreement later that year when Hurricane Delta was coming back to Lake Charles. And they were set to use that same agreement when Hurricane Ida decided to move to the east, which everybody knows what happened. When Hurricane Ida was declared, we knew we had to evacuate our youth at Bridge City, and we did so and evacuated them to the Swanson Center for Youth in Monroe. We brought them back 3 or 4 weeks later when power was restored and we were on full power, and we felt it was safe to bring it back. At the present time, OJJ has a signed agreement with Jefferson Parish, and we're looking to sign one with EBR. They came to us and asked to sign these agreements. I did receive a call from Director Roy Junkner from Jefferson Parish right before the Hurricane Ida, and we were going to house their youth at the gymnasium at Swanson. Unfortunately, we had the contractor cut a line, and we couldn't get power restored into Swanson before they could come, and I think they ended up at Florida Parishes. We also received a call from Terrebonne, where they had 2 youth that were stranded down in Terrebonne, and we assisted them in finding bed space for them. We're working on a plan here, and we've spoken with one of the governor's policy advisors in regards to legislation, where I have no doubt that this will be a good plan where state government is helping locals. There is a statute, and I believe Demetrius talked about it. It's 36408 in regards to, keeping kids separated from state kids, pre-adjudicated from kids that are housed in state's custody. So there's going to be, some legislation or a law that needs to be changed, to be able to facilitate this plan. There's also going to be, probably some legislation that needs to go forward that involves the dorms that we have presently in Swanson, being able to use those, but it doesn't look like I am trying to add beds. So there's going to be some legislation that's going to need to be enacted, to be able to facilitate this plan. To be able to put it out here, Representative Duplessis, without talking, to my boss, Governor Edwards or the Chief of Staff, I don't think I'm in a position to go ahead and put out the whole plan. And I apologize right now to not be able to talk about it in depth. But I think it's a good plan, and it will use. I have to use the dorms in Swanson. Well, we'll have to have some legislation that talks, and I think Demetrius talked about this as well, is taking away some of 36408 and legislation that we're not adding any beds. So I guess I'll
look forward to hearing. We look forward to getting a brief on that plan after you've had a chance to obviously consult with your boss, but we are definitely eager to hear it for certain. But also we understand protocol and you know, you have someone to report to. So we and I just want to mention that. Did you have anything else you want to add?
No, sir. I just want to say, and I will be happy as soon as I brief him to y'all can call it an emergency meeting or a separate meeting or just get the committee member, and I'll be happy to tell you about it in depth as soon as we talk to, you know, to the governor and chief of staff.
Okay. Any members of the commission have any questions at this time for Mr. Summers?
No, not regarding this issue. I'll hold my other questions to the end if we have time. If not, I can send them directly to receive more information about separate questions.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, those are all of the invited speakers that we had on this particular issue around the evacuations. I'd like for a moment to revisit the conversation that Secretary Walters and I were having in terms of ideas of how we move forward. We have had some conversations prior to this meeting, and I would like us to go back there. I wanted to use this discussion to be really focused on solutions and how we can identify the issues and what tweaks need to be made. We've had at least 5 different agencies talk about their viewpoint on this. And I think now we're at a point as a commission where we need to be focused on how we can fix some of the challenges that have been laid out so that we never find ourselves in this predicament again, and that we're compliant with the law, and that the children are being put first and housed in a safe manner. Again, that's compliant with the law. So Secretary Walters, you had made some comments earlier about DCFS maybe not being the best agency for licensing, not necessarily being the experts. Can you share a little bit more about some of your thoughts about what we may need to be taking a look at?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Representative. I will say that Dr. Bush and I talked about this several years ago, and it, you know, it always boils down to money, of course. So our licensing team is tight, and so I don't have any licensing people to give if I give the responsibility to Mr. Summers. So I'm gifting him something with no asset, you know. But what we think is more appropriate, and I'd really like the commission members' views on this. And if you agree, then maybe this could be rolled into this package of the other things that Bill needs to address in his plan, or wants to address in the plan. But we're not juvenile justice experts at DCFS. We're child welfare experts, and we license child welfare. You know, we used to have child care, and that went over to education where it was more appropriate. And so I personally, as the secretary, don't think it's appropriate that DCFS license something that we have no great expertise in. And so it makes more sense to me that the licensing goes to the Office of Juvenile Justice. Now, that would mean that he would have to be given the money and the TO to create a licensing unit inside his shop, because he doesn't have one. And so it would be a fiscal ask, and it would be, I don't know how many people he would need, 2, 3, I don't know. But he would need some people to handle the workload. So it was just never anything during the first term that Dr. Bush and I felt like we could tackle, because the budget, you know, was just in such struggle in those early days of being at deficits. But now that the state is a little more stable and our budget isn't so tenuous, I think it's a good time to think about that. So I open that up to the commission members. You know, what would your thoughts be about where this should lie?
Well, I have to be honest and just state that when this whole issue came to light, and I began to learn that DCFS was the licensing agency, it definitely stood out to me. It wasn't something that I expected, but I'm also not, I'm not, certainly not an expert in juvenile justice. It's something that I care deeply about, but maybe, I don't know the history behind why DCFS was charged with being the licensing agency for these pretrial detention centers. I mean, I have thoughts, but there are probably people on this commission that are much smarter than me who want to chime in there, who've been there. But I'm all about ensuring that the children are in the best situation so that they're getting the services and the treatment that they need to be getting, whether it's pretrial or post-trial. So whatever agency is best suited to do that, whether it's DCFS or OJJ, that's where the licensing needs to happen. And so my openness is very clear in terms of how I feel about it. I don't have any sense of allegiance or feeling that it needs to be a DCFS over OJJ, because that's how it is. If OJJ can better do it and they're given the proper funding, then I would be in support of that. I'll open it up to any other members of the commission who have any thoughts or questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, it's kind of a good segue into what's going to come later in the agenda by having the presentation. We have someone here that's going to talk about their work in Connecticut and how they're working with their juvenile commission, if you will, and setting up. And later, I'm hoping that we can start talking about setting up our own committees and work groups so that we are able to tackle all of those issues and like really follow sort of the blueprint that the juvenile justice reform kind of put in place, right? And just sort of connecting all of the dots, and so that we're making sure we're doing all that we can in the best interest of our young people. So I don't know, or we wanted to kind of, first, we still need to approve the minutes. We didn't do that at the beginning of the meeting. And then I don't know if you wanted to make the recommendations after that, before we go to the presentation, or either later.
Yeah, before we do that, I see Mr. Pittman has a question. We thank you. We definitely need to do the minutes. We kind of jump right into it after roll call. We're going to approve the minutes. But I do know that there are members of the public who would like to comment on this part of the agenda before we move on to the presentation. So what I'd like to do is first give Mr. Pittman an opportunity, and then we'll go from there.
I don't actually have a question, but I did want to comment. And Ms. Walters, I have the utmost respect for the work that you do. I think you do a tremendous job at DCFS. I think you might be off target asking this to be an OJJ responsibility to license the detention facilities. And I say that fully acknowledging that it's an odd fit for DCFS as well. OJJ is not a regulatory agency. They don't have a regulatory apparatus. They would have to build it entirely from scratch. And at the same time, there's entirely good reasons why OJJ needs its own oversight and accountability. And then who would be looking over them? Now, I'm not 100% convinced that this position is the correct one, that it should stay with DCFS, but I am also not at all convinced that OJJ is the proper place to be regulating other juvenile incarceration facilities.
So Richard, what do you think? So this is a good point and stuff I don't know. So what do you think? Where should it lie? And
been there, Ms. Walters. Where should it lie? I don't have a great idea of, the whole idea of having a juvenile prison is so strange when you think about it. Like who should regulate such a thing? Is its own is derivatively a weird question itself. y'all still regulate and license like daycare centers, right?
No, we don't. Those went to
Who does that now?
The Department of Education does.
Department of Education does?
Yeah, well, it's childcare, it's early learning, so it's an education.
Would it make sense to, I'm not asking you this question, I'm kind of asking the universe this question. Would it make sense to have some sort of a multi-systemic body that would be involved in licensing and regulation and oversight of juvenile facilities?
I'll leave that to the experts. I think our issue all along is we're not experts in this, and it's awkward for us to, I mean, you know, we have regs written on a piece of paper, and so we follow the regs. But we're not the expert, and anytime there's a question or somebody wants a waiver, we're in this, you know, then I have to go to an expert to give me an opinion to do something that I don't feel like the department, that's not our body of work. We do like.
Do you know how other states do it?
I don't know.
Okay. I can give a little bit of the history. Prior to mid-2013, there were no licensing and regulations on juvenile detention facilities. If you wanted to throw up some posts and some chicken wire in your backyard and call it a juvenile detention facility, you could. And the detention standards and the licensing practice was a big, not an innovation, but a big step forward in doing that. And how it ended up in DCFS's lap, I don't know. Probably somebody saw, well, there's a big bureaucracy. Surely they have some spare capacity.
Oh yeah.
And they had children right there in the name.
Right.
Beyond that, I really can't say, but it was certainly an improvement over nothing.
Yeah.
Right, I'm done, Representative Duplessis.
Thank you. I do think you raise an important point, Richard, and I'm glad you raised the point, because you know we want to make sure that anything that we are considering supporting, you know, that we're looking at it from every angle, and if we advocate for a change, you know, we have to know that OJJ, they know, we know that we all already know that OJJ is already hampered with funding, and we have to already be trying to get them funding for what they're already trying to do, and then adding that additional piece to their responsibilities if they're not historically a licensing agency. That's something that we need to be aware of. I think that we need to be focused on getting this wherever it needs to go. And if DCFS is saying we're not the experts, that also concerns me. So we need to, I think this commission should probably be making it its business to look at some national best practices, seeing what's happening in other states. Do other departments of children and family services license in other states? If their juvenile jail agency does it, then how are they doing it? You know, what resources do they need to effectively do it? And always keeping that emphasis on the fact that it is pretrial. And you know, if it just stood out to me honestly that DCFS was doing this just for pretrial detention facilities and not, you know, not post conviction. So it just struck me as a little odd at the outset. So this is something that I think we need to look at, some national best practices, and try to come back with some recommendations, working alongside with DCFS and OJJ. I'll give Mr. Summers an opportunity, if you care at this moment, to share any thoughts, unless any other commission members had any other questions on this particular issue of the transferring of responsibility to OJJ on the licensing piece.
A question for Secretary Walters.
Yes.
You made a comment that if you did have a licensing issue or something that came up with one of these facilities, you would have to reach out to an expert on that. Who would you reach out to? Who would you communicate with?
We reach out to Mark Solar at the Task Force and Center for Children's Law and Policy.
And he would advise you as far as how to proceed?
Yes.
Okay.
Like recently, we had a request for the use of mace. And I didn't, I think, do I hear Joy and Kim?
What did she just say?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Is that okay?
That's okay. Can you repeat the question?
I think, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, you go ahead, Bridget.
I had actually asked her, I think she said if there was an issue that would pop up as far as licensing with one of these facilities, she said that y'all would reach out to an expert, and I think she mentioned Mark Solar.
Right.
I think she was talking about maybe a specific instance recently.
Right, and so he was a part of the original task force and helped us really to come up with the standards, since this is not our area of expertise. And so we do look to him often for guidance when things come up from providers, or they submit a request for a waiver, to ask him, you know, how do you handle this in other states? What are you all doing? Can you give us some ideas and suggestions? And we often, you know, we value his opinion because he was kind of there from the beginning with us.
Okay, and I'm sorry, who is he with? Remind me again.
He's with the Center for Children's Law and Policy.
Okay.
Out of DC.
Mm-hmm.
Representative Duplessis?
Yes, sir. Dr. Webster? Okay, your connection for some reason isn't the best right now. We're having a hard time hearing you. Not sure.
Maybe you could put it in the chat.
Yeah. Right now we're having some issues with your connection, Dr. Webster.
I think Rachel had a question.
Rachel Gassert. Yeah, what we're gonna do is, what I'd like to do, I know we gonna have a sort of public comment portion of this piece of the agenda. And if we can get Dr. Webster back on, we certainly want to bring him back on. Dr. Webster, you there? No, it's not working out. It's not working out. Sorry, I'm not sure what's going on, but the audio and the connection just is not coming through. Maybe try logging off or logging back on. I'm not IT savvy enough to try to troubleshoot through, but we're not able to hear anything you're saying. Everything is all jumbled up. So I'm going to ask Rachel Gassert to come on and share comments from the public on this issue of the, I'm not sure if you want to speak to the licensing piece or the evacuation scenario as a whole.
Both, but I was inspired to speak on the licensing conversation.
Okay.
Rachel Gassert, I'm the policy director for the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights. And I wanted to comment on this proposal, but I also wanted to say that I do not think that this proposal has anything to do with the conversation that was that was on the agenda today. That what happened with the evacuation of JJIC is not a result of the licensing structure. It is not a result of the licensing regulations that currently exist. It was not a flaw of the current licensing process, other than the fact that DCFS failed to, see that JJIC was putting together a evacuation plan that was illegal, that violated Article 822 of the Children's Code. And although the licensing regulations do include a provision that allows for the licensing of a facility that is on the campus of an adult jail or prison. There are currently no licensed facilities that meet that criteria. There is no DOC facility that is a licensed facility. So that does not apply under the current circumstances. So to that extent, that's true, but that does not require an expert in juvenile justice or juvenile detention practices to understand. That just requires someone to read the plan and to look at the laws and provisions to understand those very basic facts. So I don't think that this conversation is relevant to the topic at hand today. And I think that spending so much time on it is a distraction. But I do want to say that I do not support, I do not think that this is a good idea. The little that I've heard of it, I'm skeptical that this is a good solution. One of the biggest problems we have in Louisiana's juvenile justice system is that while we have a licensing structure for our pretrial detention facilities, which is great and which is unique in this country, we have secure care facilities that have no oversight whatsoever. There is nothing that requires licensing or authorization of the conditions of our facilities, or even that they exist. OJJ can and has opened up a facility without notifying anyone or getting authorization from anyone. They can just open a new facility if they want to, and no one has to approve it or even know about it. And that's a problem. And kids are in and have been in OJJ facilities that have very concerning conditions. And so I would hardly think that OJJ is an expert in, and this is not specific to this leadership of OJJ. You know, I respect the work that Bill does. This is a systemic and endemic problem that has always been true of OJJ. And I suspect will always be true. And it is true of state juvenile justice agencies all over the country. And so I do not think that they are appropriate to be assessing the quality of conditions of confinement for other facilities. And in particular, they are certainly not experts in short-term pretrial detention facilities, because that's not what they do. And so I do not think that this is a logical next step. And the last thing that I would say is that I don't think that doing this work, licensing these facilities, requires any expertise that cannot be learned and trained into someone who has the interest and the will and an interest in children. So that is my public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gasser. I appreciate your comments. I'm just curious, are you aware, just when you mentioned, when we talk about national best practices, are you aware of any other states where the Department of Children and Family Services does indeed perform the licensing at pretrial? And if you don't know, it's fine. I'm just curious as to, I want to know if we're unique in that regard.
I don't know off the top of my head, but what I would say is that there are some models where there's an office of the child advocate. So I could envision a system where there is an external independent entity which does this kind of work. I would not necessarily embed it in an agency that is responsible for incarcerating children. But I do not know off the top of my head if other states.
Understood.
So Representative Jjcoc.
I think Dr. Webster's going to take another shot. Let's see if his.
And then right after that, I definitely would love to get to the presentation, because the issues that Rachel brought up are definitely indicative of what we want to discuss, and then get to the committee part. So then we can begin to do the research and do the work.
Okay.
So
thank you, Ms. Gasser, and now Dr. Webster, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, there are other states that use Department of Children and Family Service. I think the model was inspired by the work of the Annie Casey Foundation, where most of those standards were modeled by states, and they were the office that was kind of knighted in that process that most states followed. You can research it. I couldn't tell you exactly how many, but I know for sure that there are other states who are regulated by DCSF. One of the things that I just wanted to offer for friendly consideration, while I understand the Department of Children and Family Service struggles for expertise and may go outside to their one expert. I would like to see the department spend more time talking to providers on the ground that live in this state and in this community and understand what we're faced with, because it's one thing to be a regulator, but to be disconnected from the work on the ground and in the field. And while it might be nice to defer to an expert who might not even live here, that there are laws that have changed, like raise the age, that creates a different context for providers. And all those things have direct implications for being able to recruit and retain staff. So while sometimes we may, believe that, we can fix everything with policy, you can't fix it without connecting with the people on the ground and really learning from that and extracting from that how groundwork informs policy, because there could be sometimes a disconnect with, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but the idealism of how this works from an advocacy standpoint, from a policy standpoint, and then it's left to trust that people can implement on the ground. So this is a relatively new experiment over the last 10 years with standards, et cetera, but laws have changed subsequently. And there's a real need for the agency responsible for regulating to create its own mechanisms to learn from the field in a way that's proactive and not just reacting to one-off requests for waivers or incidents as they arise. So I just wanted to offer that to this group.
Thank you, Dr. Webster. And I think you make a very salient point. And I think that's something that we all need to be cognizant of. So thank you. I appreciate you sharing that additional perspective, because I think it's very, very, very salient. So we are now we're turning the corner at 2:15. We still have many other matters left on the agenda. And we spent a little bit over an hour on this, and we obviously have much more work to do around this particular issue as it relates to the evacuations of children who are detained pretrial. And as we move into this analysis of who the proper agency is to be making the pretrial facility licensing, where that should be housed, or if it, or what additional resources those agencies may need. Those are the things that are standing out for this commission to continue to drill down on, to come up with some solid policy recommendations on. But that work is going to happen in between these meetings. When we get off these calls, we're going to be following up with Secretary Walters and Secretary Summers from OJJ after he's had an opportunity to meet with the governor and his team. And I know he has some proposals that he'd like to share as well. So with that, I do want to thank everybody for your comments on this particular issue, but there's still a whole lot of work to be done. And I will give any other commission member an opportunity to share any additional final thoughts you have on this before we move on to the next agenda item, or any final questions you may have as it relates to the issue around evacuations.
One thing I would like to bring up, I'll do it very quickly. I would like for our recommendations on policy changes to include a central point of contact in the event of evacuations. A person at the state level whose job it is to be the recipient of information about what facilities are evacuating, how many kids they have, and where they've gone. Somebody at a state level should have that information during evacuations.
That's a great suggestion.
Can I add one quick note also? This is Joy Lager with licensing.
Yes, briefly.
Okay, when we obtained the juvenile detention programs, we didn't come with the staff either. We have 5 licensing specialists currently who survey our child placement agencies, residential homes, maternity homes, and juvenile detention facilities. And so statewide, we have 5 who are responsible for all of those programs throughout the state. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there, in the midst of the conversation.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that with us. I also want to point out, looks like Secretary LeBlanc dropped off. I know Derek from Justice Griffin's office had some questions initially. We wanted to limit the questions to commission members. If Derek or Justice Griffin, who couldn't be with us today, have any additional follow-up questions that we need to get Secretary LeBlanc, please share them with us, and we will see to it that those questions do get answered from the Department of Corrections. All right. So with that, we have a presentation from Erica Nowakowski. Gina, do you want to introduce the presentation that we're about to have? Because I think it ties directly into what we were just discussing.
Yeah, I think for the sake of time, I will let Ms. Nowakowski couldn't be here. And so in her place, we have Kelly Orts, and have her to do that with her presentation, if you will. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina, and thank you everyone for having me. My name is Kelly Orts. I'm covering for my supervisor, Erica Nowakowski, who had a family emergency. So I apologize for not having a lot of background information as to what this presentation is about, but what I do know is that I manage our Juvenile Justice Policy and Oversight Committee for Connecticut. And so hopefully any information that I have and in this presentation can help you all in Louisiana regarding the work that you're doing. So I will do my best to go through this presentation. Like I said, I just jumped on at 2 o'clock, and so I'll do my best and hopefully answer questions at the end.
Ms. Orts, do you have any estimation, just so we know, do you have any estimate on how long the presentation is?
I would probably say about 15 minutes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem. All right, so I'm going to start sharing my screen. Can you all see the presentation?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. Okay. So this is my supervisor, Erica. She has a very long background working for the judicial branch in Connecticut, as well as doing some gender responsive services and working in Council of Accreditation. And now she works at the Tau Youth Justice Institute at the University of New Haven and helps manage our juvenile justice work in Connecticut. And so just a little bit about me in my role is that I manage the Juvenile Justice Policy and Oversight Committee, which is a legislative committee in Connecticut that's dedicated to policy reform for the juvenile justice system. And we are a multi-system committee, meaning we have all 3 branches of government represented on the committee, as well as all state agencies. DOC, Department of Corrections, Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, Department of Children and Families, all the acronyms you can think about, they're on our committee, as well as our state advocate, Office of the Child Advocate, Victim Services Advocate, and so we have advocates as well who represents the best interests of the children. And so this committee is made up about 42 members, all appointed in legislation, and they also have their designees attend these meetings, and we meet monthly. And so I'll walk through a little bit about how this committee came about and what we're working on, and how we're structured. So like I mentioned, the evolution of the JJPOC, Juvenile Justice Policy and Oversight Committee, originally started with the Raise the Age effort in Connecticut, where we raised the upper age from 15 to 16 to 17 of the juvenile justice system. And we also worked on decriminalizing status offenses. So those were kind of the beginning parts of the JJPOC. I see that she included some links so that you can look back on our history as well as look at the website, but I'll kind of skip over that for now. So this is the legislation that created the JJPOC, Public Act 14217. And in this legislation, it actually identifies the Tau Youth Justice Institute to staff this committee. So there are a lot of legislative committees in Connecticut, but not a lot of them have an entity that staffs it. And what that really means is that my role is solely responsible for supporting the work of the JJPOC. That means I manage all of its work groups, I coordinate all of the meetings, I reach out to national experts and guest speakers. We facilitate discussions on policy reform, we draft up legislative reports, we do a lot of the work. And our background is obviously in juvenile justice and criminal justice, but we are not the experts in corrections, which is why we work with DOC. We are not the experts in child protective services, which is why we work with Department of Children and Families. So we work with these state agencies because they're the experts, they do the work on the ground, and we really help with that administrative support. And I think that's a strong suit of JJPOC in comparison to a lot of other committees where we're able to do a lot more work, mainly because we have that staffing support. The co-chairs of this committee are Representative Tony Walker, who represents New Haven in Connecticut, and she's also the chair of Appropriations. And we have Secretary Melissa McCaw, who is the Secretary of the Office of Policy and Management, who's appointed by the Governor of Connecticut. So we have two very powerful people who chair this committee, that meets once a month, and they guide our work really in all that we do. So for this slide, she included our JJPOC membership, so you can get an idea of who else are members of this committee. But like I mentioned, it is multi-system work. We really do work with every single area that may touch a child. So we're talking about education, we're talking about Department of Children and Families, we're talking about housing, health, etc. So we really focus on the fact that we need to collaborate in order to make an effective change in a child's life, because there's so many systems that are working with them. I'll go through a little bit about how we structure our work and then also how we build consensus, because that is definitely one of the biggest challenges that we continue to face, is building consensus. We have representatives from the Republican Party and the Democratic Party on our committee. And so building consensus amongst the committee is extremely important, because what I always say is that you can't make everyone happy. Everyone will either be half happy or half unhappy. And so, but in order to make change, you have to meet in the middle. So that's a lot of what we do facilitating these conversations. So some of our goals was to, one, increase diversion by 20%. And so what we did to do that was we measured the referrals of delinquents to juvenile court, as well as referrals to juvenile review boards, which is our community JRBs. And as of December 2019, we decreased our referrals by 31%, and we've met our goal. So we continuously track some of these goals to keep us, on track as to where our efforts lie. Another goal was reducing incarceration by 30%. So as of December 2019, there has been a decrease of over 50% in the state's juvenile detention centers. There's been a consistent reduction in males admitted to Manson Youth Institute, which is our institute that holds 14 to 21-year-old males under the Department of Corrections. And admissions for the York Correctional Institute, which is the females, have remained extremely low. We also have a goal of reducing recidivism by 10%. And this has been more of a challenge, I would say, for the JJPOC and for Connecticut in general. We do have, and I'll go over some of the work groups, an incarceration work group that's really focused on reducing recidivism by increasing our focus of reentry and wraparound services for youth who are leaving facilities and going back into the community, and really understanding what challenges and barriers they face. And like I mentioned, that touches housing, that touches education, jobs, et cetera. So we're really trying to work with all of those different agencies to ensure that when a child leaves a facility and they go back into school or the community, that they have the supports that they need. And this is something that we track every year. We also have a data work group that helps us keep track of all this information. So our strategic plan, we update it every 3 years. We actually just updated it this year. So these are our general strategic goals for the committee: limit youth entry into the justice system, reduce incarceration, reduce racial and ethnic disparities, and right-size the juvenile justice system by setting appropriate lower and upper age limits. So those are the 4 goals that have really remained consistent over the past, I would say, 6 years with the committee. This might be too small to see. Can everyone see the chart? I'm not seeing head nods or.
It's a little small, but we're gonna work through it.
Okay. So for this, I actually have a larger one, if that helps. Let me just share a different screen. Is this better? Okay, great. So this is an organizational chart that shows the Juvenile Justice Policy and Oversight Committee and its many, many work groups and subgroups. So in addition to my job of managing the JJPOC, I manage these work groups and these subgroups. And so I'll kind of walk through the structure and how we decided on which work groups to form, and then how the subgroups play a role as well. So these dark blue boxes here, these 6 boxes, are the work groups of the JJPOC. So each of them focus on different areas of the juvenile justice system. We have the front end, so a diversion work group that's focused on community programs, schools, diverting youth away from the formal justice system. We have a cross-agency data sharing work group that is made up of data representatives from all the state agencies to ensure that we are sharing data about our youth that can help us keep track of how far we're progressing towards our goals, and just ensure that we're making decisions based off of our data. We have an education committee. They are focused on educational services for students in schools in general, but also education for students in justice facilities. So ensuring that there's quality insurance, there's opportunities for GED and high school diplomas. There is a quick transfer of credits if they're leaving a facility and going back to a public school system. So they cover all things related to education. We also have a racial and ethnic disparities work group focused on reducing racial and ethnic disparities in our system. And obviously that touches every other part of our work groups. And they really focus on identifying where those juvenile justice decisions are being made and where those biases might be impacting these decisions. And they also work heavily with the data work group to see what those ROIs are like. And then we have a community expertise work group, which is our work group that focuses on engaging community members, parents, and youth with first or secondhand experience with the justice system into our work. So we want to make sure that the individuals who have been impacted by the system are also voices in our work. They attend our meetings, they provide us with feedback, they tell their experience and how it can help us improve our juvenile justice system moving forward. And then lastly, over here, we have the incarceration work group, which is obviously talking about the deep end of the system. And they're focused on improving conditions of confinement. They're focused on housing of both pretrial and adjudicated youth, as well as looking at commissary needs, reentry services, and so forth, which I think is a lot of what you all were just talking about in terms of housing and licensing. So those are the 6 work groups. As you can see, there are also these smaller boxes down here that are called subgroups. So our work groups are probably between 20 and 30 people. It's technically open to the public. Right now we're operating over Zoom due to COVID, but before we were meeting in person across the state. And so with each work group, they form subgroups every year, and these subgroups change. So for example, the diversion work group really wanted to focus on raising the minimum age in Connecticut. It was originally 7, so a 7-year-old could get arrested and formally processed in the system. They wanted to raise the minimum age to 12. So what they did was they formed a small subgroup of about 10 to 12 people. They invited the necessary individuals, such as court support services, to look at the data of what 7 to 11-year-olds are getting arrested for and where they're going, how they're being processed. They invited advocates. They invited youth with lived experiences. They invited school officials because they also deal with that age group. And they looked at national best practices as well as international best practices and other laws around the lower age. And they proposed to the JJPOC raising minimum age to 12, which follows California, it follows Massachusetts, and as you probably know, New York raised their minimum age to 12 this year. So we proposed that piece of legislation to the diversion work group. That's our vetting process. So since it falls under this work group, they do the work in the subgroup. They report it back to the diversion work group, who passes it along to the JJPOC. The JJPOC votes on it, and then it goes through the legislative process. And so we were successful in raising the age to 10 this year. Although 12 was approved by the JJPOC, there were some compromises and negotiations that happened within the Judiciary Committee. So now, as of this year, our minimum age is 10. So that's just one example of one subgroup and how it kind of flows up through the work groups into the JJPOC, and how we structure our work to be very specific in what we prioritize. And you can just see how all these subgroups and work groups, obviously turn into many, many meetings a month. And our JJPOC only meets once a month. So we really rely on these work groups and subgroups to do more of the work, more of the research, and report back to the JJPOC. I'm going to go back to the presentation. I think it's almost done. And then I'll answer questions, because I'm sure there are questions. Okay, so this is the flow chart. It is describing what I was just talking to you all about how the subgroup does a lot of the tasks, the data collection and review. They draft the reports, and then it flows up to the work group level, which vets the work and provides feedback. And then it goes to the executive committee, which I didn't mention before, but it's basically made up of all of the work group co-chairs. So each work group is co-chaired by 2 individuals, and those make up the executive committee. I like to think of it as JJPOC leadership. So they vet that work and those recommendations, make final changes before it's presented then to the formal JJPOC, who then formally votes. We do a roll call vote on recommendations every January and February. So at the beginning of each year, we have a package of recommendations that's formed, presented to the JJPOC. They vote, whatever is approved moves through the legislative process that year. So that's kind of our annual process. And Erica knew that I was going to talk about that. So this is the annual process, so a year in the life of the JJPOC. As I mentioned, January and February is when they vote on the recommendations. The legislative session usually happens in the spring. And then honestly, right when that ends, we start working on another package of recommendations starting September, and start drafting it and then presenting it again next January. So it's kind of like a cycle that we know very well at this point. And lastly, she wanted to show one more document. Okay, so this document is an example of the work plans that each work group is focused on. So this year, diversion work group is focused on these different areas, and et cetera. I'm not going to read them all to you, but this is kind of how we organize our work. We organize them by creating work plans every year on what each work group is going to focus on. What does Connecticut want to focus on in diversion, in racial disparities, in incarceration? We recognize that there are a lot of different issues that we can focus on, but if we spread ourselves too thin, we find that we don't actually get a lot of work done. So we really need to prioritize our focus, because most of these members are doing this on their own time. They're not getting paid extra to be part of any of this. And so they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart and because they play a role in the JJ system. So we try and focus on different areas each year. And once legislation passes a certain bill, there may be an implementation team that needs to be created to implement that legislative change. So we also base it off of what legislation passes. But that's just an example of how also TAO plays a role. We are the ones responsible for drafting work plans, drafting reports, and getting us organized. Because as you can imagine, it can get complicated and overwhelming. And that is actually the last slide. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And
Thank you, Ms. Orts. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. And I do understand it was sort of last minute, so we appreciate you sharing that insightful presentation. Ms. Womack, you have any comments? Do we have any questions from members of the commission?
Okay, well, hearing none, I thought folks would have a lot of questions or comments. And, you know, thank you, definitely.
Gina, this is Tracy Woods. I did have a few.
Okay.
How y'all doing? Okay, first I was interested to know how did they formulate that multidisciplinary committee when they pulled this together? I was just wondering, how was that formed? And who selected those people? Is it in legislation, or it kind of grew out of the need to kind of include everyone? That was one of my questions.
yeah, that's a great question. So the JJPOC was formed in 2014 because there are really a few different parties who were interested in having some sort of entity in Connecticut be responsible in keeping track of our juvenile justice system. There was no real body that was kind of having that oversight. And so Representative Tony Walker, who's the legislator in New Haven, also chair of appropriations, was very interested in having and creating this body. At the same time, the Tao Youth Justice Institute was being established at the University of New Haven. And our executive director, Bill Carbone, who was the executive director of Judicial Branch Court Support Services for many years, had a professional relationship with Representative Walker. And they had this conversation of, what if we create this legislative committee focused on juvenile justice and have the Tao Youth Justice Institute staff and support this committee. And so then we sought out funding from the Tao Foundation, and we have funding from the state to now support this committee, and it was created in legislation, and all of the members are also appointed in legislation.
Okay, thank you.
That was a great question, because it revealed something pretty noteworthy, that the co-chair, I think you also mentioned, was chair of appropriations. And that certainly always helps when we're talking about funding. And that's a crucial piece as we look to try to find these kind of models. That's a great question, Ms. Woods.
Yeah, it just follows up on some of the conversation I've been listening to this afternoon about who's responsible, how do we get this done? And it does seem like it's a cross-section, it's a interdisciplinary collaboration that we need to consider as we move forward.
Yeah, because you mentioned state funding in addition to private foundation funding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Representative Bryant, did you have a question?
Ms. Woods she did a great job of getting the answers to the questions I had. I just wanted to know if their budget is their budget published, and the list of that committee, where the exact people who are on that committee from what disciplines, is that published for us to be able to pool?
Yes, it is. So the presentation has a few links that you can visit the Connecticut General Assembly website and view that information. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I know that if you visit the website, they'll have it.
Okay.
And I just also want to mention a few things as I was listening to the conversation beforehand. So we recently passed some legislation this year that we recognized that there was no oversight of educational services for youth in juvenile justice facilities. There was no quality assurance. There was no person ensuring that there would be a transfer of credits, a transfer of records in a timely manner. And so we actually had met with the Department of Children and Families for many, many times, and they have graciously volunteered to be that entity. So now we have in legislation that the Department of Children and Families will be the oversight for educational services for youth in justice facilities on a high school diploma track. which is a big change for Connecticut because it was very fragmented before. And one of the reasons DCF had volunteered is because they understand that it is in, that these students are children first. And they volunteered to create a unit that will work with the detention centers as well as the Department of Corrections to oversee their educational programming. And another unique part about Connecticut is that our juvenile detention centers are run by the Court Support Services Division. So that is the judicial branch. It's not run by DOC, it's not run by a juvenile justice office or anything like that. It's actually underneath the judicial branch, whereas the Department of Corrections runs our adult facilities, and that includes any facility that holds the 14 to 18-year-olds as well, who are charged as adults.
Okay. Do you guys have public meetings?
We do, yes, over Zoom.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is amazing. And you know, I want to definitely make sure we have time to approve the minutes, and definitely make sure we have time for a couple of questions from the public. But I just wanted to say a few things, and I have a one-sheet quick presentation that is just for us to start thinking about, because we do have a lot of work to do. But you know, when Louisiana passed its Juvenile Justice Reform Act in 2003, we were really ahead of the game. Like, the blueprint is amazing. It definitely laid some groundwork for everything that Ms. Kelly was speaking about. And so hearing different presentations from different entities, this one struck me, you know, the most, and wanted to make sure they were able to come and do a quick presentation for us, because we do have a lot of work to do, but a lot of the work is already happening. I know people have sat in meetings with me. I go from table to table and have been, you know, like, we're doing a lot of the work with the connectivity and the partnerships, and making sure the information comes from the ground is hugely important. And our law allow for that. So keep in mind that what I'm going to show you in regards to a layout that I kind of put together was just a quick kind of doodle. And I'm hoping that we can hear back from everyone that's been on this call to give us some input, and we can put together a structure that's really similar. I've been talking to Professor Woods about involving Southern University to support us in this. I'm just going to give it the quick rundown, and hopefully to get folks, you know, really excited and sending us questions so we can, as a commission, figure out the dynamics together, and then all of the working groups that are necessary. But right now we have the JJRAIC, the executive committee, as was mentioned. I was thinking that executive committee could consist of all the JJRAIC members, but either the director of the Children's Cabinet or the chair of the Children's Cabinet, the superintendent of education, and the secretary of the Office of Juvenile Justice. These groups are already doing a lot of the work that is laid out in the Juvenile Justice Reform. I put together a similar work plan. I've sent it to you all before, but we can kind of look at it and revisit it. And my thoughts around selecting the way the work groups would go is definitely the way the legislation is broken down. So maybe there could be a work group of the front end of the juvenile justice system, and that would be about limiting entry into the juvenile justice system. Maybe the co-chairs, I don't really have to be a co-chair, don't really want to be, but I threw my name there just because I was volunteering other folks, but these are just ideas. Everything is open for suggestions, but this place could be the co-chairs with the executive director or the chair of the Children's Cabinet. We could look at the cross-agency data sharing as a subgroup, the Children, Youth, and Planning Board Coordination subgroup. We already have in law, Act 555, that looks at every jurisdiction should have CYPB. That way, just like what was mentioned, I think Dr. Webster said it, we are making sure that the people who are doing the work are instrumental in making sure that what we get at the state level comes directly from the people who are doing the work. And it also includes youth and families already on those at that level. And then we can look at maybe racial and ethnic disparities, subgroups. And again, folks that can participate can definitely be a wide range of folks. Two things under the Education Commission. There's an education work group. Co-chairs maybe Professor Tracy Woods and the Superintendent Dr. Brumley. There is something we need to focus on immediately, HR 15 as a subgroup. I had some recommendations, but Dr. Brumley is not here anyway, so I would send him the information that would be requested so that the subgroup can do its work. And work that's also already happening is the Student Behavior and Discipline subgroup. There may be other things that can come under that we should look at. But then also the deep end of the juvenile justice work group, looking at reducing incarceration, and maybe the co-chairs could be Justice Griffin and the Secretary Bill Summers, and we can look at post-disposition. That was something we talked about at the last meeting, as well as alternatives to incarceration. And again, we can expound upon that. If folks have any suggestions, I would invite you to send any of the committee members the suggestions so that we can hear from everyone and that we can make these work groups very workable. We can actually accomplish the work that we need to do and center our children in those conversations so that when we are making compromises, those compromises are going to be in the best interest of the young people who we are trying to, from birth to adulthood, to keep them and divert them from incarceration. So, and maybe the committees can then just sort of follow a process of possibly, having the work groups then send recommendations to the executive committee to vet. And then the JJRAIC, which includes already legislators, then we can take all of that information and literally make sound legislation to make sure that we're capturing what is necessary and what is needed from the ground, and we can coordinate, and so that our children's budget can be consolidated and it can be effective and hopefully meet the needs of the young people. So I'll definitely stop there. Again, please, anybody has questions, let's jump on the call, send emails. Let's make this as open and participatory as possible so that we can set up some level of accountability. So the conversations that we had earlier about evacuation can literally be happening inside of those committees. And when we get to these JJRAIC meetings that really only happen quarterly, we are making larger decisions and all the work is literally happening in the work group. So that's my presentation, and we'll happily take any questions.
Thank you, Gina. So just to clarify, the model you just shared with us is sort of like our version of the presentation that we just saw from Connecticut.
It's the short and skinny of it, but and so I just wanted to kind of lay out what we already have in existence. There's, and the reform, the juvenile justice reform encompassed so many things. It also missed a lot of things. So we want to try to figure out how to make sure that when we're passing legislation that we're hearing from all the existing tables that's working and making decisions, and we're able to make more collective and unified decisions that are definitely centered centered around youth and young people and their families.
Thank you. One of the things that we often talk about since we reactivated this commission a little under a year ago is that if you look at the legislation that created this commission back in 2003, it really gives very clear authority to the JJRAIC as being the commission that is charged with ensuring that the reforms were actually implemented and carried out. So, you know, these meetings are not supposed to be just some moment where we just come and talk and check in, but it's really supposed to be measuring and ensuring that the laws are being carried out. I mean, that's in the 2003 reform legislation. We haven't been doing that as a state. So to me, as we have been having these meetings since I think January now, it's become clear to me that something has to change in terms of how we are going about working with OJJ, working with the executive branch, working with the legislature to ensure and working with the judiciary, because we learned that Connecticut, their judiciary, I mean, that may be something we have to look at here in Louisiana, but working with all of the different agencies to make sure that the law is being upheld in the way that it was envisioned to be upheld going back in 2003. But we also know that funding is a big part of it. And I'm just mentioning that to say that this commission really has a very serious charge. And it's you know, it's just not being met right now. So perhaps what Gina is proposing is a new way that we can rethink how we're doing this to really get us on track. I don't have any other thoughts at this time as it relates to that, Gina, but I do appreciate the time and effort you put into that. I know that there's a lot of subcommittee work that needs to happen in between now and our next meeting, but do any other commission members have any other questions or comments as it relates to Gina's presentation or Ms. Ortz's presentation? I'll also open it up to any members of the public who have any thoughts or comments on the presentation that was just discussed. All right. So
Representative Duplessis, this is Arthur Walton with the city of New Orleans, and I have
Yes,
a question. I have a question about the setup in Connecticut where the courts are charged with the juvenile facility. That sounds like an interesting concept. Are the courts set up and charged with the jurisdiction? I'm sorry, charged with the facilities by jurisdiction?
I'm going to let Ms. Orts address that if she is able to.
Yeah, I'll try my best. So the reason that happened was because there was a Connecticut juvenile training school that was essentially the juvenile detention centers, and that was actually managed by our Department of Children and Families. And there was a big push to close the juvenile training school in Connecticut. And when that push happened, we needed to figure out who would be running the detention centers. CJTS is a big campus. It really does look like a mini jail setup. There was a lot of pushback, and so when that happened, the Judicial Branch Court Support Services Division took on that responsibility to manage the juvenile detention centers. And so it is very unique. You know, we've had, actually someone had mentioned Center for Children's Law and Policy. We have had them come and provide some consultation about this. And they run, I believe there's only two right now, Hartford and the New Haven one closed, Hartford and Bridgeport, two locations. And they're also in charge of running our region staff secure programs. And this has happened within the past 10 years. So it's pretty new, and they're also now taking on services for pretrial youth who are charged as adults. So originally they would go to the Department of Corrections and adult facilities, but now we're working towards bringing pretrial youth underneath the umbrella of juvenile facilities. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but that's the kind of information I have. I'll try and get more information from my direct supervisor.
Okay, thank you. So So I was just interested at how that was broken up and set out. And it seems to be obviously it's a novel concept, but it seems to be an interesting concept. I hope we will take a look at how that is working.
I agree. That's a great observation. And I'm glad now we have, I think we have a question or comment from the Louisiana Supreme Court. Curtis Nelson, you have a question or comment on this?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Representative Plessis. I would just really urge this body as you begin to develop your work groups to also keep in mind there are a lot of commissions that have been formed within the state that have to report to you. I'm currently chairing on behalf of the Supreme Court, the Juvenile Detention Alternative Admission body, and we have to report to you. You have to submit an annual report to you. And I was glad that Ms. Womack highlighted the Children Youth Planning Boards. Those are other legislative bodies within our state. I would say the activeness of the Children's Youth Planning Boards probably not where it should be, but those youth planning boards are supposed to report to this commission as well on what is happening at the local level. So, you know, I'm really excited with what Mr. Womack presented to you, but I just also want to remind you, you have some commission boards who are supposed to submit reports to you and give you updates and do some of the groundwork that needs to be done for this commission.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. We appreciate you. Okay. Just a few more matters. I know we have some members of the public who are wishing to speak. As it was already pointed out, I'm going to go ahead and ask that we approve the minutes. That was something that we should have done at the outset. Dr. Nagatu?
Yes, so we just need a motion to approve the minutes and then someone to first and second the motion. So just a commission member to lay the motion on the table.
Move to approve minutes.
Second.
Second.
All right, and the minutes have been approved. Thank you so much. Will the PowerPoint presentation be available? I think we can have that made available. Can we? Yeah. All right, we're gonna get that provided. I know we have some public comment from, is it Ariel Test, who's here on behalf of Louisiana Center for Children's Rights? I'd like to give you an opportunity to share any comments or questions you have.
Thank you so much. This is not as it relates to any topics on the agenda. I appreciate the opportunity to make public comment. My name is Ariel Test, and I'm a lawyer at the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights, or LCCR. LCCR works with children who have been arrested in Orleans and Jefferson parishes, in East Baton Rouge Parish. We work with children who are sent to OJJ secure care facilities. And over the summer, we learned that a new OJJ facility, or secure care facility more specifically, was opened in St. Martinville. What I've learned about the experience of kids in the facility has been shocking. Children have reported to us that they receive no education, no counseling, and no programming. Children say that they are in cells for 23 hours a day. According to OJJ, the new facility was opened to serve children with the most severe behavioral needs and disabilities. And yet, instead of providing them with treatment or education, OJJ is isolating them and failing to provide them with the services that can help address their needs. A recent public records request response confirmed there are no regular or special education services being provided for students who are incarcerated there. OJJ's website does not list St. Martinville as a facility that children can be detained at. I believe this committee needs to learn more about the facility and the plan to provide for services there. I can answer any other questions that you might have.
You said that
I would request this banner be placed on the next agenda.
Yeah, Absolutely. We're definitely going to have it placed on the top of the agenda for the next meeting. I guess I just have some initial questions of clarification. You said that it is an OJJ facility. It's not even listed on the website.
When I checked a couple of days ago, it still was not on the website as facilities that children could be sentenced and sent to.
Okay. I just want to make sure I heard that correctly.
I believe that there are some policies within the policy manual where you could find reference to the facility, but it is not listed on the website in a way that children or their families could get information. And I believe that there has been testimony to the lack of services provided to children that are incarcerated at St. Martinville.
Okay. All right. Well, you in that short period of time, you definitely shared a lot that I personally find very concerning. So we need to, I want to give the necessary parties an opportunity to present, and we can have a very thorough discussion on what's going on at this facility. I see Derek's hand raised. I want to go ahead and acknowledge him and give him an opportunity to ask a question if he has one or make a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, have you contacted Disability Rights Louisiana about this? They have a federal access mandate where they could go in and enter and request all these records you need without going through the regular hurdles.
Yes, we have spoken to. Yes.
Okay.
I realize.
Go ahead, Ariel.
I was just going to say, I understand that this is a hard topic to raise at the end of a 2-hour meeting, but I thought it was important for this committee to consider and wanted to make sure that it could be focused on if it needs to be between and before the next meeting. And I think that given the conversation we're having or that was held about who has accreditation and supervision authority of facilities, I do think it's important to acknowledge that a facility opened that is not providing services for kids with disabilities.
In addition to that, I just wanted to bring up, it was one of the other things, I'm going to send an email to Mrs. Summers about various education questions that have come up, or special education in the different facilities. But I would just love to revisit this commission possibly doing a visit to Swanson and possibly all the other facilities again, and here maybe doing a listening session for parents of all of the facilities, because we continue to hear disturbing stories, things about COVID. And so possibly if we can think about doing a visit to Swanson, as well as maybe a parent forum where the commission can hear from all the parents whose children are in these facilities, so we can have a good understanding of what is happening.
Yeah, hopefully we can work together as a commission and try to find a good date that we can, at least the majority, if not all, can try to make that visit to Swanson. And certainly hearing the testimonies of the parents and the families who have to share these challenges is important for our work as we try to make the best possible decisions. So we need to certainly incorporate that, whether it's as part of one of our regular meetings or whether we have a separate meeting that's dedicated just to hearing the parents and through a different forum. I'm open to that, and that's something we need to give some thought to as we in between whenever we make that decision. So I really appreciate that you bringing that to our attention, Ms. Tess, and now we need to have some conversations with OJJ. And I don't know if OJJ wants to speak to anything right now. Again, we are at the end of the meeting. This was not on the agenda. So if we, I just want to at least give them the courtesy in the event that they want to speak to anything that was raised. We owe them that courtesy in the event they want to, but this will certainly be on the agenda for next meeting so we can take a more thorough deep dive into what was just mentioned.
Yeah, the only thing I would say on this is that all of that is not factual. Not all of it. We're not near where we want to be in this regard. We are depopulated a lot of it. And the need for this facility came up after some pretty serious incidents that happened in in at Swanson in the Cypress unit, and then when we moved some children or some youth to Ware, quite frankly, didn't have any place to put them. And so we'll talk about it more at a later date. But and like I said, I've spoken with Ariel about this. I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and told her and LCCR about some of the issues that we were having. So I was very open and with her and the group about our challenges with this, and we're working on a lot of it every single day. So anyways, I'll stop and we'll answer more later.
Thank you, Mr. Summers. I want to just reiterate, as we've shared in the past, I want you to view this commission as a vehicle to help you in solving some of your challenges that you might be faced with at any facility. So if it's St. Martinville, which I know very little about at this time, and my hope is that after this call, we can schedule a follow-up discussion to try to answer some questions, to try to get to some what is true, what isn't true. If someone's saying something's true that's not true, well, we're gonna try to peel that back, try to figure out what actually is true. But what's for certain is that if it's a matter of you having challenges and your office having challenges that need additional funding, or you need more manpower, or whatever the case may be, we want to help elevate that to the ears of the folks that need to hear it, so that we can try to solve some of these problems. So that's what this whole process is about. And I look forward to following up with you offline, as well as LCCR and all the other advocates to follow up on that conversation, as well as Representative Bryant, because it's in his district. So this is something we need to take a deeper look into, and we'll revisit it when we come back for the next meeting.
Sure.
Yep. I'm going to ask Ms. Womack to give any thoughts you have, or anything we missed that we haven't hit, or Dr. Nagatu, or any other members of the commission.
I just appreciate the time and attention to everyone that came today, and that's going to follow up with us so that we can roll up our sleeves and get to work. And as you just said, like, this is I appreciate everyone that's doing all of the work. I know it gets hard. We're trying to connect the dots so the lift isn't so heavy on any one organization or system folks, that we are all in this for the best interest of our children. And I think we can support each other and partner again from the ground up, and ensure that we are making good decisions for our children. So that's all I have to say. Thank you so much for Representative Duplessis for serving as the chair, because this is a heavy lift, and we really appreciate your leadership on this.
Yeah, thank you for all that you do. Mr. Pittman, did you have anything?
No, I believe I've said everything today I need to say.
All right. Well, I appreciate all of your comments and your work, and you always make great comments and ask great questions. And I appreciate everybody who's willing to spend these hours working on a matter that isn't always sexy. It isn't always easy. It's never easy. In fact, it's not an easy issue to solve, in trying to ensure that our children, whether they're in pretrial detention or post adjudication, are getting the services and the treatment that they need, and just reminding ourselves and reminding the public that the reason we have a juvenile system is because they are not to be treated like adults. They are juveniles. So we have to go about it in a much different manner. And we don't want to continue repeating the same mistakes. So I believe that everybody on this call has those intentions, but resources matter, and we have to make sure that we're getting the resources where they're needed. And I think that the proposal you made, or the suggested proposal you made on a new structure, Gina, is something we need to really look at adopting here in Louisiana as possibly a way to streamline some of the issues that were raised earlier, even if it's things like the licensing piece between DCFS and OJJ, and what jurisdiction should that lie. We had Mr. Pittman as well as Ms. Gasser both say that they didn't think OJJ was the best place for that. So, you know, if you have people with credibility who work with juveniles who are saying OJJ isn't the best place for that, then you know, maybe there should be another agency or subgroup that has that charge. So we had a lot of work to do between now and our next meeting. We haven't set a date yet, I don't believe, have we? Okay, we'll send out a date between now and whenever that time is.
Thank you.
So with that, we will go ahead and bring this meeting to a close. Do we have a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
All right, we have a motion to adjourn. Thank you all so much. Please enjoy the rest of your Tuesday afternoon. Thank you.